What are the commonalities among leaders who sustain excellence over an extended period of time?
All right, Jordan, Jonas, man, it's great to have you here on the Learning Leader Show. Welcome, man.
Thanks, Ryan. It's great to be here. Looking forward to chatting.
Yeah, man. Well, I just right off the top, if for some reason you're listening or watching and you have not watched the show Alone, which is on Netflix, I'm talking currently to the person that will become your favorite cast member of that show, at least season six. And that's a guarantee. It'd be impossible for you to watch Jordan on your screen and not literally just root like crazy for the guy. So, Jordan, I want to get into your story, but first, I've talked with you about the fact that I am fascinated with excellence, specifically people who have found a way to sustain excellence. And you definitely are one of those. And I know you've surrounded yourself with others who do as well. What have you found to be the commonalities of people who have sustained excellence?
Oh, I think a lot of it has to do with probably your mental approach and your the attitude you maintain, especially in adversity. And so obviously that's something to really unpack, but it's amazing how well, you need the positive attitude in combination with the proper skill set. And I think you can then sustain excellence because you actually, they're interdependent to some degree, but having the proper mental outlook is definitely a big part of that.
That's one of the things I found when I was watching you on Alone. Especially in comparison to all of the other contestants on the show, when they would cut to a segment about you, I found that everyone on that show complained except for you. You really only seem to have a fear about losing too much weight, and then they would pull you from the game. Outside of that, it didn't seem like you hardly ever complained. You made jokes. You were a character in front of the camera. You had fun. You had a positive attitude. How were you able to have such a positive attitude in a situation that was dire? It was cold. There wasn't any food unless you went and killed it yourself. I mean, all of these things are working against you, yet you seem like you're on vacation most of the time. How are you able to have that attitude?
I think it's probably a multifaceted approach, I would say, but there's a couple. Oh man, it is. Let me see where we would start. You could start by, anytime you're in life and you're going to come up on problems, which we're all going to do, it's really important to kind of be proactive in how you approach them rather than reactive, or, kind of, if you want to put it the other way, like be in fight mode instead of flight mode. And I think like, things would happen to me out there and it's difficult, but rather than being just like, oh man, this is terrible, you think like, okay, so this happened. How can I adjust my plan to proactively, like, come up against this challenge and overcome it? I think that's just one aspect of it. I think part of it is also having perspective on what situation you're going through. So I might be bummed that a wolverine stole my fat or whatever, but having been well read in history or just having dealt with life experience that, I guess my grandmother had to watch 7 or 8 siblings die, so it kind of puts a perspective on your, relative suffering, because you can get really bent out of shape about, it's all pretty relative, like you can get bent out of shape about not having good Wi-Fi, or you can get bent out of shape about about any number of things, but having a perspective that I think is a lot informed by, people in your life who've approached suffering well, or historic, accounts, you can really help you.
Well, so you
keep a level head.
Can you talk more about your grandmother? I didn't know this. So what happened in her life?
She was both my grandparents on my dad's side. So his parents were Assyrians in the Middle East. So they were, and they're, you've probably heard of the Armenian genocide. Mm-hmm. So they kind of got caught up in that whole thing. so my grandma her dad was taken off to be shot. You know, the Ottomans came into their village or whatever, and the grandfather was taken off to be shot, and then my great grandmother and her whole family all the kids were just driven out into the desert, kind of on a death march. And sure enough, 7 of 8 of her siblings died in the desert out there. You know, they just had to watch them all slowly waste away and die. Her mom, when their baby sister finally died, just gave up and collapsed on the ground too. And my grandma and her sister had to like drag her to her feet and just be like, come on. So they, you know, we got to keep going. So they kind of ditched the baby's body, you know, and moved on and made it eventually to a British army camp where they were saved. But actually her mom and the surviving sister, you know, didn't make it too long afterwards. I don't know the history of why they died, but maybe of exposure, or, you know. So my grandmother was an orphan, lived through all that. Grandpa had a real similar story where his dad was in a wheelchair. They you know, they were coming in, burning down the village, and his dad just shoved all his the money that he had into my grandpa's coat and just said, run for it. And don't turn around. And so he ran, and of course he turned around. He was 17 at the time. Turned around and just saw the whole building with his dad in it, like up in flames. Never knew what happened to his sister, and he escaped. Again, he was also an orphan. Made it to eventually was taken in by some Jesuits after, you know, making it to a refugee camp. But there they were. They both went through all that suffering. They died before I was born, but it's amazing to see their 11 kids were like my aunts and uncles and my dad, obviously. And none of them, they didn't harbor hate. They didn't like dwell on what was done wrong to them. They were joyful people. And somehow in one generation, they had turned all this suffering into a really positive family that, you know, even the home videos we do have of grandma and grandpa, they're all together with their family around the table having fun, you know, cooking up rabbits that they raised, and, you know, just real happy people. And that whole side of the family is kind of full of joy like that. And it really, there you go, gives you perspective like we were talking about, you know.
Wow. So you're able to regularly draw from those thoughts and memories and the stories of the heritage of your family.
Definitely. That was something that I definitely drew from, and it definitely keeps you from pitying yourself in simple situations. But, and my dad did the same thing. My dad had a real, you know, didn't have a very nice end to his life, and that he had diabetes and had lost his legs, lost movement in his hands. It was, you know, drawn out experience over a decade. And same thing though, I'd hear him like at night down in his bed, like crying out in pain. But then in the morning I'd go down there and he'd be positive, and he would be encouraging to us, and, you know, have good conversation. And he didn't dwell on his suffering. It was, you know, he learned a lot in those 10 years. I think one of those things that he learned was, you know, that our value is much deeper than what we're able to produce sometimes, and having a hold of that, you know, grasping that kind of deeply was really valuable for me. It was valuable for me to see, not only hear about the stories prior, but see my own dad go through suffering, but maintain joy, you know, interesting.
For the people in the world who do not have that, they don't have those stories that they can draw directly from because it's in their family. They can hear the pain their dad's in, yet have him still wake up with a positive mindset. I can imagine that is ingrained in your mind and will be forever. But for those who are not, what are some, like, we'll get tactical for a second. What are some things you think that, like, advice you may give to others? I'm guessing you're asked to speak a lot. You're going on podcasts. You're doing some things to help others. What are some things you think that those people could do that don't have similar histories as to you?
Yeah, a lot of what I learned, you know, it was a direct exposure by having the family history and stuff. But I also got to say, I learned a lot just because I'm interested in history and interested in reading. Reading like the Gulag Archipelago, for example, when I was a young kid, was real impactful on me in a similar way. Just seeing people, different ways of approaching suffering, people who approached it negatively or in an egotistical, like self-centered manner. Usually kind of, even if they survived, they kind of burn themselves up. Whereas people that took kind of a higher path seem to thrive better. You can get it from literature. There were even reading old, when I was young, I used to like to read war memoirs, and you'd read, German World War II memoirs and just realize what these guys went through, and then all to lose the war and realize you're fighting for something you don't believe in. And, just the whole mental agony that some of those people go through. It puts perspective. I think it's helpful. Even if you don't have the family history to know history well,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Growing up too,
Yeah.
I read about the fact that you had spent summers riding freight trains. Can you,
Oh,
can
right.
you share more about? I think you and your brother, correct?
Right. That's right.
Can you share more about that?
Yeah, when I was probably about 19, my brother had, started traveling. First he was hitchhiking, then he started to get on freight trains. Ended up loving it. Kind of became his way of life. He rode around on trains for, I think, it was about 7 years. He just lived outside, lived on the rails, did that whole thing. At one point, he invited me along. I'd just been working at a little salad dressing plant, and I was like, sure, might as well. So I went with him, and it was a pretty life-changing experience, a good coming of age type experience where I got to experience a whole different type of freedom and a whole different pace of life and view a different angle on life. And it kind of stuck with me, I think. But yeah, we just rode. I mean, I didn't do it a long time. I did it for a summer plus, probably 6 months or so. We rode across the country, rode up and down the East Coast, and then made our way back. Among that was probably the first time that I spent a good, a week alone, just riding the rails by myself. So that was my first extended bit of time alone.
What is a typical day when you ride? I mean, I'm trying to imagine this. What's a typical day of someone who rides freight trains for 6 months?
So well, that's one of the interesting thing is every day is different, right? Because you never know where you're going to end up. But one thing about it is you're going to always be out there somewhere in the world, either meeting people or confronting some kind of rainstorm or something you got to deal with.
Because there's no roof, right?
There's no roof. Even if you're not on a train, you're just sleeping out in the woods somewhere. And so it's you're always really in the world, whereas obviously we all live in houses, which is great, but it does, you don't run into as many people, have as many odd experiences. So you'd wake up maybe in the morning and you'd be in some town and you wanted to try to find out how to get to the next town. So you walk down the train yard, kind of observe and watch what they're doing and wait for one that's going in the right direction that you want to go, and wait for it to move slow enough that you can run and jump on it and see if you end up where you're hoping to go. It's not the most precise method.
I would imagine you've got to be quite resourceful and figuring out how just to do the life's basic things.
Oh yeah.
In addition to movement and finding and hitching a ride, but like getting money for food and all the taking a shower. Like, what about all of that?
So we did generally just work when we got into certain towns. The nice thing for me was that my brother had built certain connections over the years traveling. So when we came to a town, like, oh, we could go work for so and so we'd go do usually construction related work, and maybe you'd go to a food kitchen and help out for a day, or help them unload a semi, and they in exchange get some free cans of food, and that's basically all you need. The showering might have been not the most common activity out there, but swimming, you can swim whenever you get somewhere.
Yeah. So you that somehow then leads you to Siberia. Okay, and you choose to live with the I hope I pronounce this right, the Evenki tribe.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a nomadic tribe of reindeer herders.
Yeah.
How does this guy from Idaho who's riding on freight trains, all of a sudden finds himself in Siberia. I guess one is why, and then share a little bit about some of the learnings, the key learnings from being with those people.
Yeah, so we ended up staying for work in Virginia. That was where good temporary work was. I was there for a while. While I was there, I'll try to make a long story short, but I have an adopted brother who found his biological family. Turns out he has a biological brother who was going to go to Russia, and he kind of told me about it. There's a missionary over there that was building an orphanage and needed a hand, and I prayed about it at the time, felt like it was the right thing to do, and so I just bought a ticket for a year and went over there to help that guy build that orphanage and do his thing over there. I got there and I knew I was going to be there for quite a while, so I wanted to live with Russians, and that guy was an American, so he sent me to a neighboring village where I lived with a couple Russian families just to be immersed in the language and pick up Russian faster. And sure enough, the two families I lived with, the men of the household, had both been in prison for a number of years and had been in prison with a native guy. And they'd always tell me, "Oh, you got to go up north and meet our buddy, up north." And eventually, maybe a year or two passed in Russia, I did meet the guy, and he invited me up, and he was like a fur trapper in the far north, and he kind of showed me the ropes on that, took me out with him, and then but he was an Evenki guy, and all his cousins are actually nomadic reindeer herders. So after spending some time with him, he snowmobiled me out to a tipi and dropped me off, and that was that.
Wow. What are some of the takeaways or the learnings you picked up from living with that tribe, the nomadic reindeer herders?
Well, I learned a lot of skills, basic life skills for forest living and how to separate kind of the wheat from the chaff in that realm, because they know what works and what doesn't. Also, it was interesting living with people who live in a way that our ancestors probably did for most of history. They really connected to nature. You kind of are more in touch with the life and death cycles that go on around you, because you're always hunting and you're always, and death isn't an uncommon thing over there, unfortunately. So you're always confronted with it. That was interesting to me to see kind of the way they approached life in that way. It was just through a little slightly different lens, in that you felt a little more a part of the circle of life and the life cycle. Then when you feel a little more detached from it in modern
because
society.
You're really only eating what you're killing, correct?
You're eating what you're killing, right? And and unfortunately, because of alcohol and stuff, there's actually quite a bit of death over there,
and so humans
even. So it's something that you confront a lot in their way of life, but because you're confronting it not only amongst people over there, but also constantly every day, and you're just day by day living, it just feels more a natural part of the cycle. It doesn't make it any less hard, but it just makes you feel more connected to, I guess, the way the world works.
Does that
interesting.
elicit like more gratitude in you, or what emotion is created when you see?
Yeah, I wonder what it does. I know gratitude has been an integral part of my approach and how I maintain, a positive mental outlook. But I'm not sure. I'm sure it was fostered there. I'm not sure if it didn't really develop there, probably. But yeah, you live out there in the wilderness, and just every day you're not on. Another interesting thing was just not being on a set schedule for any reason. You wake up and you have things you have to do, all kind of related directly to your needs. Like, oh, I need to catch some, I need to eat, so maybe I should go hunt or fish, or I need to build a sled or something. There's just a few things you have to do, but no specific time to do them. So you have to be somewhat self-motivated, but you also just have no schedule. So you can kind of do whatever you want as long as you're covering your basic needs, which was an interesting experience. It's not something a lot of people can experience long-term in the modern world, you know?
It probably teaches you to be, I would imagine, a combination of disciplined and, as you said before, proactive, knowing like this is not going to get done unless I do it. So I've got to do it. And a lot of it's kind of survival basis.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay. I want to get to your time on Alone, the TV show. So first of all, I know a lot of people applied to be on the show. How did you get cast?
Well, I'd actually applied years before they called me. I had watched the first couple of seasons and just thought, oh, I could do that. Like probably everybody, you know, half the people who watch it think. But I
don't think that. But I know no. But I'm not like you. You think that, and obviously it's you're correct. But go ahead.
Well, it just so happened to be right up my skill set alley.
For sure.
But I wrote them and kept it pretty simple. I think I sent him a link to my YouTube videos living with the reindeer herders. So I'd filmed most of that. And then I forgot about it, honestly. It was like 3 years later, I was working on a driveway, installing some driveway, and I got a call out of the blue, and they just said, hey, this is casting from Alone, and they were pretty interested in having me on the show. You know, you still have to go through a bit of a vetting process, but they sounded like they were quite interested if I was willing to do it. So
yeah. So okay,
from left field.
Once you get cast, I don't know how much time was there between they said, Jordan, you're going on until you actually are.
Well, that first call happened, and then you got a month or so until they have what's like a boot camp, and then they select from the top 20 people. You know, they select the 10, and then when they let you know that you're for sure on the show, I think you have about a month and a half before filming starts. Basically.
So what happened during that 4 to 6 week time period when it was go time? It was, I got to get, I imagine you went on that show to win. You didn't go on that show just to do it. You went on to win.
Yeah. I wanted to, yeah, definitely. If I wanted to just do it, I could just go do it anytime. Right. I tried my hardest to put on weight. I've never been able to put on much weight, so I was hitting that hard. And you know, you kind of brushing up on some of the skills. I'd been in the States for quite a while. I had a couple kids in the meantime since I had been to Russia last. So a few years had lapsed since I'd been in Russia, and I wasn't quite in the zone of that. And so I was like, well, I'm gonna. I hunt and do all that stuff, but there's a difference between hunting and like really living in the wilderness. And so you just kind of brush up on some of your skills. I think I kept it pretty simple though. I was mostly just relying on that to come back to me as I got there. Sorry about the glare there.
You're good.
And then, and putting on weight. That was my main concern. I knew I could probably handle it mentally and I had the skill set, but there's a bit of a time between when you can make life happen out there and you don't want to starve out before you get set up.
Yeah. As well as you get to choose some items to bring along with you. What was your mindset or thought process behind what you chose to bring? I assume you have to have, you're very deliberate and there's a purpose behind each and every, because you don't get everything you want.
Everything I took that I was somewhat related to me providing food in some way. You know, that was like every item that could potentially provide food I tried to bring or make while I was out there. And and everything else was kind of just the basic stuff you need. So like an axe is probably the first tool you need in the wilderness and the one tool you would need if you needed only one. And then but everything from there was just like, man, is this going to save me calories or provide food? There wasn't any like particularly luxury items or anything.
One of the things I noticed when watching is that you certainly had a fine shelter and it looked hospitable and good enough, but
good enough.
But I don't know if it was nearly as good as many of the other contestants that they had built. It seemed like you had built a good enough shelter, and you were fine with that. Like, you didn't need as cozy of a space as others did. What I don't obviously you couldn't see their spaces when you were doing it. What was it about you that you think differed from everybody else in that?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I think my experience in Siberia made it very clear to me that I wasn't gonna get too cold out there. Like if I could, I'd lived in -60.
You were where? This is where was it again? The Arctic.
Northwest Territories on Great Slave Lake. It's called.
Okay.
Yeah, it was. I knew it. You know, I'd lived in a teepee in -60 weather and been outside a lot at those times, and I knew that I wasn't gonna freeze out unless I didn't have enough calories to keep my body warm. So it wasn't a matter as much of having a warm shelter. I just wanted one that stopped airflow, allowed me to kind of dry my clothes out, but I wasn't going to be hanging out a lot in there. I was going to be always pursuing food, you know? So I kept it simple. I threw it up in a day and then I just went out and hunted and fished and snared and did all that stuff. And then slowly over the time, you'd come back to your shelter and you'd improve it as you went. But I wanted something that would be quick and effective, which I think I found. And mostly I didn't want to spend energy and time on my shelter as much as I think a lot of people. Yeah,
it was interesting at the time I watched, and a time probably a lot of people watched, where we were forced to stay in our homes, our nice plush homes for most people, especially in comparison to where you were on the show. But some people are really struggling with isolation, especially those who probably don't have a family, where they're forced to stay inside or not go anywhere or hardly go anywhere. And so a lot of people are watching while they're feeling that, but then seeing you deal with this isolation. What was your mindset in order to not let that get to you? Because it never appeared to me as you were even remotely close to tapping out. It didn't even seem like it was a consideration to you.
I hadn't even thought of it yet or anything. It really was not a consideration. It was like, but I think to deal with the isolation, you employ a few tools, but I maybe one was to think, I always expected it to go on way longer than it did, honestly. I was so surprised when it ended. I couldn't believe it. I hadn't even thought it was.
How many days was it?
77. But I had put in my head that I needed to be out there 120 to 140 days to even have a chance. So I didn't.
So you thought like maybe you're halfway through.
Right. I thought maybe I was halfway. I hadn't even thought it might end. So kind of I don't know, maybe I'd dub it like a pessimistic optimism, where you kind of expect the worst, but then you're only pleasantly surprised if you can come to terms with the worst case scenario. And I definitely come to terms with it being 120 to 140 days. So that's so that kind of helped, but also the day to day, I remember after I got the moose, I thought, okay, I should probably conserve calories. I'll just sit here and like sit in my shelter and relax. And that was the longest morning of the whole time out there. I was like, man, this is ridiculous. I'm going to go out and do stuff, so being productive and active was really important to me. And so I don't think you just want to, I think it would be I know when one of the guys quit, Brady, I don't remember if it was on the show or if it was after the show and I talked to him, he said, man, if you just want to feel what it's like for me, just draw a circle and stand in it for 24 hours. And, you'll see how crazy you kind of go. And that would be the case, especially if you didn't just work to stay busy. Like I never wanted to allow myself to be in that mental position where I was going, you definitely kind of, if you sit in one spot and you're bored, then you just start thinking about, I miss the family and I'm hungry for this and all the things that you don't have start being a problem. On top of that, staying active, just being grateful for what you do have. Like I think you mentioned it earlier, and it was true. I almost had fun the whole time. Like it was actually a really good time because I was, you can focus on what you have instead of what you don't have, even when you only have 10 items, I guess. But
what about humor? I feel like you use this as like a tool, and maybe almost like you felt like this maybe the camera was your friend in a way, because
That's a good question.
you had something to perform for, like, and you
Right.
were really funny on the show. You could tell your personality. I mean, I know they only use a fraction of the footage, but still, like, I felt like you used humor as a tool to probably help, I'm guessing. How did you?
It absolutely was. So one of those things that would help me deal with the isolation, because there's certain times where you just don't have anything to do that's productive. And so you kind of have to, you're either going to sit there, but what I would do is I would try to think of elaborate skits or things like that I could do that I would think would be funny. I mean, of course, the show was great, but I was a little bit disappointed that some of the ones that I really liked didn't get on there. I did this whole like Normandy recreation with all these different scenes and this and that. It just kept me busy, and I had fun doing it, And so I think that's a really good observation. The other thing, I noticed a lot of people said they hated having the camera, and then it was a real big problem and it bothered them. But that's another thing that's a mental outlook, because I'd spent, 5 weeks alone in Siberia living with no camera or anything. And I just remember, I think it was 3 weeks in before I remember walking into this beautiful section of forest, and I said out loud, like, wow. And then I just caught myself like, whoa, I just spoke out loud for the first time in 3 weeks. That was my voice, so my mind had been really active, but I had been basically quiet. And the other thing that I would think about a lot is, well, this is really cool, but everything I experience is going to be forgotten once I forget it, And so it felt, and I don't have the greatest memory. So it just felt like, I'd go through this crazy experience that was like a once in a lifetime story. And then I knew I would just forget it, or that I wouldn't be able to convey it in the way that it happened. On the show, I was really grateful for the fact that I had the camera, because it really did felt like it was a shared experience rather than being completely alone. So I think, again, that's another thing you brought up that is somewhat how your mental approach to it. But I think that was just I think it would have been annoying maybe had I not had the prior experience of not having one, and realizing what a blessing in a way it was. Because it is cool to be able to share all that. Yeah.
Did you actively think of, like, this could be a dumb question, but were you thinking of, like, as a television producer at times during, like, I want to make a good TV show?
Yeah. I think there were times where I was like joking with whoever the editor was going to be, but like, man, if you guys can't make a good show with this, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
But I'd be like, yeah, definitely with the skits, I was just trying to be.
Well, I mean, like, I think of, like, Tom Hanks befriended a volleyball in a movie,
right.
But still, like, I feel like there's some similarity. Like, you had something to say, like, I'm documenting this, and maybe the thought of, like, I'm actually doing this to produce. Because, like, for me, I think this would be cool, and maybe they'll give you the extra footage, or maybe they already have, because you have a family, and this is something they could always see. Like, how cool for your kids to see what their dad has done. I mean,
that's
like the coolest.
When I did my pre-show interviews, that was one of my big. They're like, "Why do you want to be on the show?" Obviously, it's an opportunity to win a large amount of money, which is hard to earn.
$500,000, right?
But a close second is just being able to share. I just told you about my grandparents earlier. What would I do for just a video of them? What was their life like? Who were they? And so knowing I could convey that a little bit was very valuable to me. I told that to the producers early on. Unfortunately, they don't give us our footage. So what I have is what is on TV.
Oh, why wouldn't they give that to you? Or at least like make like a cut up of something of like.
Oh, exactly.
I would actually add it on Netflix to like Jordan, and like 2 hours of Jordan's highlights that didn't get air. I feel like that would be like, I would definitely watch that. I feel like a lot of people
have so much footage like that. I can't believe they don't. I don't know why they don't. It would be there's kind of a gold mine of footage, and there's so much stuff they don't put on the. Again, my total airtime was maybe an hour, but it's from 77 days. It's like there's so much that they don't air. It's unbelievable.
And you're shooting for like more than 12 hours a day?
Yeah, exactly. You're shooting every waking moment. So it's just, there's so much that happens that doesn't get on the show, and stuff that you just think is totally show worthy, even more so than maybe what makes it on. So I'm really surprised they don't take advantage of it a little more, but
so
maybe they will someday.
I want to talk about the moose. So I believe I only watched season 6, so I have not seen anything other than that
Right.
season because that was which was
Right.
on Netflix. But from what I read, nobody had killed big game before. Is that correct?
Yeah, nobody. No, that's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you're the first, and it feels like to me though you went into it expecting to do this.
Yeah, I definitely. So it was interesting, of course, when I got on the show and you're preparing, you go on Reddit and things like that and read about what people are saying about the show. And they had a lot of highly reputable outdoorsmen and stuff were talking about how there's really no way to survive out there. What you need to do is get fat, go in there and burn calories slowly, because with what you have, it's too impossible to make a life out there. So, of course, I read all that, but I just knew for me that wasn't an option. I was the thinnest guy out there, probably had the fastest metabolism out there. So I was just like, man, I'm going to have to go out there and make it happen. The advantage I had was I'd lived in a similar climate before, and I know that it's possible to live up there. So just knowing that it's possible meant that all I had to do was get to my land and kind of unlock the key of what that would be. Is it going to be bear or fishing, or is it going to be moose or muskox, or what is it's really about finding your particular situation. If you know something's possible, it's just about finding a route to get there.
Being
and so yeah. And so I think that was it was definitely sorry, I kind of forget your question, but I might have answered
the mindset you had, I felt like you had the expectation that I am going to get something big.
Oh yeah.
In fact, that's the only way I can win,
right.
is if I get.
Yeah, I didn't necessarily know I was going to. I knew I had to if I was gonna win.
Right. So it was like this is my ticket to winning. I'm not going to win unless I get this. And yet everyone else is saying it's never been done, Jordan. It's not going to be done. You can't do it.
Right.
You didn't let that get in your way, though. And because the reason I bring this up, Jordan, is I think this is so relatable to people in general, where at times people say, well, we don't do that here. We can't do it this way.
Yeah.
It's never been done that way. And it just isn't going to happen. So don't even think about that. Versus, and your mindset was, this is what I have to do in order to win, and I'm going to win. I'm coming out here to win, so I have to do it. So that's what I wanted to hear about, your mindset, and then actually the execution of your strategy in being the first person to ever do it.
Yeah, so you're really right. It was just, I thought, you know what, it could happen or it could not happen, but it has to happen if I'm going to win, and I have to come up with a way to make it happen. So then you get into what's really cool, living in the wilderness, or maybe, if someone else is listening to this, just being in a project that you're really zoned out in, is the creative juices start flowing, and coming up with, I'd had some failures. It shows on the show that I missed a moose prior, which was, all this was a kind of a buildup. So initially, I don't know how many details you want, but initially
Go ahead.
I had seen some moose tracks, in the mud, and I was like, oh man, there's moose coming by. Of course, it probably came by at night, and I didn't hear it because I was sleeping. So I just figured, so I looked at the tracks and thought, man, if I hadn't seen this track, I would never know a moose even came by. So I need to do something to make sure I know when moose are coming by. So that's when I ran a bunch of string, put some old tin cans that I'd found on it across some of the moose trails. And then I just figured, well, I tried to set the cans up in such a way that they would just clank lightly when the moose walked through, but then I would hear it. I did, it all worked really well, except the cans didn't actually clank lightly because the moose got caught by the string and started dragging the cans. One night I woke up and I hear the clank, clank, clank. And then I just hear I jumped up and ran outside, and I see the moose. It almost worked perfectly. The moose ran away from the cans because they got scared by the cans towards me, and then turned around and faced the cans. So I came out and I had this perfect shot on the moose. I was like, oh my goodness. The only problem was he was out in a big mud flat. And I don't know if you see the salt flats, you can't really tell distance, so I had no way of judging distance, and he was kind of the biggest moose I'd ever seen. So I just thought he was closer than he was. And I took a shot and dropped it between his legs. And then the dumb thing was I had grabbed my bow and arrow and my camera, but I didn't grab my quiver. So I only had one arrow, and I took my shot and I missed it, and I went to grab another arrow. I was like, no way. And anyway, I saw the moose trot off, and you just think, shoot. Like, for one, I was actually not so disappointed because it was so cool to see that moose that close. But you're obviously like, man, I better make this happen. I kind of, so I had to come up with a new strategy on how to not, how to improve. The cans worked, but how do I improve it next time so that I can make another opportunity? You have time's kind of ticking because you're getting thinner every day, and you just have to. You're on a time limit. So
I just think like the key learning though is like you're an expert at this. You're probably one of the best of the world at doing this. You fail, right? You don't make it happen. And instead of feeling sorry for yourself, instead of thinking of quitting, instead of saying, oh God, this isn't going to happen, you say, what did I mess up? What could I learn from that? How can I improve when I get my next opportunity so I make the most of it? And that's what you did.
Right. It sounds cliche, but that's exactly right. It's like putting that into practical application. So my next improvements were to like, okay, next time I'm going to try to funnel the moose into a specific area so that he's not going to be in the middle of a mud flat or be somewhere that I can't shoot him when I do see him. So I built this big funnel fence, which was another risk because it's a caloric risk. And and then I modified my stringed cans so that it broke easier, so it would only clink once and not really scare the moose, and made those modifications, and that's ultimately how I was able to get them. So
what was that when you got him? What was that feeling like? What's going through your mind, the emotion after you hit him?
Well, getting him was a long process too, because I saw him, you get all amped up, and I took my shot, and it felt great, and I saw him cough immediately, so I was like, oh, I think it was a lung shot, and he's like and then he took off running. But I was like, man, it might not have been a perfect shot, but I think it was good enough. But with bow hunting in particular, you never want to run after an animal after you shoot it, because they don't really know what happened if they didn't see you. They kind of just get shot, and then they run off and lay down and calmly kind of bleed out. They don't really know what's going on. But if they see somebody or something chasing them, then all of a sudden they get into like, they're prey animals. So they get into like flight mode. They can get adrenaline and run for miles and miles, and they'll still eventually die, but you won't be able to find them. So I was really worried about that happening. So I after I shot him, I went back to my shelter and like just tried to pass time for the longest hour of my life, like skinning a rabbit and doing this and that. And then I went out to track them, and same thing. I was like, oh, this is good blood trail. And then all of a sudden I couldn't find any more blood, and I couldn't find any more tracks. And I just thought, no way, I cannot lose this thing, and so I thought, well, I heard it breathe, I heard it cough. I saw some bubbly blood, so I know I hit it in the lung. So I don't think it'll run uphill because that would be hard for it. So I'm just going to follow the path of least resistance. That's what I did, and sure enough, went about 500 yards and saw it laying up there. And then that was the most roller coaster period of time of my life, because I'd sit there watching the moose, but you can't go finish it off, because then of course it'll see you and it will get that burst of energy. So you kind of just have to wait, and it would like be laying there, and then it would stand up, and then I would just be like, no, and then it would lay back down, and you're just like, yes. And then no, and it did that for quite a while before it finally died. But when it did, and I walked up to it, I like confirmed that it was dead. It was like, man, and to talk about joy, there's almost no feeling like it. I couldn't replicate it with any amount of money, and it's just.
Did you think though? Did you think for a second, I'm going to win this game?
I didn't allow myself to. I really didn't. I just figured somebody else got something big. Like I always thought, oh, somebody's figured out fishing and they're being sustainable, or somebody got something big. I just never even, maybe it like came into the back of my head, but I just didn't allow it.
You know what's interesting about that, and I'm going to try to make a parallel here. I don't know if it'll work, but I read the story about Tiger Woods, the golfer. I don't know if you follow golf. You know Tiger, right? So Tiger Woods, the golfer. and he talked about how he was so mentally exhausted after one of these tournaments he had won. And they said, like, why? Like, you think maybe physically? And he said, no, mentally, because he goes, I never allowed myself to think about the end. I only solely focused on the next shot, the next shot, the next shot, until eventually there wasn't a next shot. The tournament was over and he had won. And I sense you have like a similar outlook, which I focus on, like, what do I need to accomplish today? What do I need to do? How am I going to eat?
Yeah, that's a cool parallel, actually. That is true. It's like and it was like we talked about with the Evenki, living with them a little bit. Every day, it's just, well, what do I need today? You know, and you kind of just make it happen each day. But I will tell you, the most stress I dealt with out there was when I didn't do that, and when I thought about the future, you know, like, so all my fat worries and all the things like that, it was all me thinking, man, if this goes to 140 days, I might not have enough fat. And then you get stressed. Or if, like, oh, if this goes 6 months, I don't know if I even want to be away from my family that long, you know? So then you start thinking about, when you start dwelling on the future and of course you have to think about the future. All provision is related to the future, but when you allow that to just trump that idea of one foot in front of the other, then that's a real problem. There's a cool phrase, I really like it, in Russian, called, it says, like, glaza boyatся, ruki делают, and it means your eyes are afraid but your hands do. So there's like a lot of things that you look at and you're just like, oh man, this is gonna suck, I don't want to do that. But the fact is, you just have to start putting one foot in front of the other, start doing it, and pretty soon you'll find it gets done. And that, you know, I thought of that phrase a lot, because, and I even think of it when I'm doing like long hikes and stuff. You look way at this mountain, man, I got to go over there. And it's just like, well, the eyes are afraid, but the hands do. And you just step. And then pretty soon you look back and you're like, wow, I've covered a lot of ground.
Wow.
You know,
eyes. I'm going to look up the spelling of that Russian translation. So eyes afraid, hands do. It also is like Alison Levine. I talked to Alison Levine. She summited Mount Everest, and she said the same thing. It was, I couldn't focus on the top of the mountain. I had to focus on the 3 feet in front of me, and then the 3 feet in front of me, and then the 3 feet in front of me. And that's how I was able to summit Mount Everest, is her thought process wasn't on, it's like, you got to run a marathon. It's like, well, let's try to get to this guidepost here that's a football field away, or, you know what I mean? Like, you break it into smaller chunks, and then before you know it, you look up and you're like, wow, what have I accomplished? I've climbed this mountain. I've made it 70 some days, when I've really only thought about, like, what do I need to accomplish right now?
Right. Yeah. Maybe you do focus, like, because you need some sort of future thought, but maybe what your thought is, hey, this is possible. And so then you come back to the present and you just take the necessary steps to get to what is possible. But you don't want to dwell on, you know, that possibility too long, because can be overwhelming.
Yeah, you did have a nemesis while you were there, though, after the moose. Or maybe, I don't know how many of them there were, and that was somebody stealing your food, and that was a wolverine, which is interesting coming from an Ohio guy. Ohio State, the biggest rival is the Michigan Wolverine. It was funny. I was actually thinking of it in that regard.
For me on that situation, huh?
Yeah. But I'm curious about like how, like, you kind of triumphed. You had gotten the first ever big kill, and all of a sudden somebody is stealing your food that you have rightfully earned. Yet your mindset still was just like, that guy's annoying, and I think you killed one of them. But what was the thought process around the Wolverine stealing your food?
Am I frozen before I go on? Should I?
You're good. It's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just frozen on mine.
It sounds good.
Oh yeah, man. It was, so initially I had got the moose and hung up all my meat in my shelter, or at least a lot of it, and then I put a bunch out on a shelf that was like fresh and nice. I really figured a bear would come, or, you know, I had a high probability of a bear coming. So I figured he's not going to go for my smoky, human scented shelter meat. He's going to go for the nice meat out on the shelf, and I'll hear him and I'll come out and I might get a shot at a bear, you know? So
that would have been crazy.
No, it would have been pretty crazy, but it was definitely the plan. the funny thing is I woke up one morning and I looked out and it looked like a herd of buffalo had been through there. It was just like the whole place was trampled with little wolverine tracks. I was like, what in the world? They're, of course, way more wily and quieter than a bear. So I just hadn't thought of a wolverine coming, because all my time in Siberia, though I'd heard about them a lot, I don't think they're as numerous there, and you just don't run into them. Anyway, there's plenty of them in the Northwest Territories. And yeah, he pillaged me the first night, and then yeah, it became a whole running battle between me and the wolverine for a couple weeks, where he would come in and try to steal, and I'd try to like set up situations where I might have a shot or might, at least be alerted to his presence. So I had all these defense perimeters of like cans and string and like bait piles here and there where I might get a shot at him. And yeah, it was it was definitely me or him out there, it felt like.
Watching back, I think, and maybe because it's a TV show, the editors seem to make it seem as like there was a chance you could lose, but it wouldn't be because you would quit. It was going to be because you were pulled from the game. And eventually, I mean, spoiler alert, you'll still love the show, knowing the winner is obviously Jordan. But I would love for you to take me to your emotions the final day when your wife comes up and surprises you, and it's almost like you still didn't believe her that you had won initially. It seemed like from
Right.
face. What was going through your mind on that 77th day when that's how they, I guess they show, like I said, this is the only season I've seen, but that's how they let the winner know that they've won, is that they bring their spouse up there. What was going through your mind at that time?
So hadn't been showing us our weight, so I didn't really know what my weight was. I will say I felt really good and looked normal.
You kept like talking him into it. You're like, I'm good. I'm good. I'm happy. I mean, it was like you were like selling so hard. You better not pull me from this game.
I was actually really. So I guess one of the things they might do is, they have these periodical medical checks to see if your weight's too thin or this or that. And they told me they needed to do an extra one, and I was just like, no way. Like, you gotta be kidding me. And then all these things start running through your head, like, I'm totally fine. Like, is this show rigged? Like, maybe they want someone else to win. You're like getting all like, I had like really worked myself up because I felt totally fine. And then, and I had not, like I said earlier, I just hadn't even thought that it could be close to ending yet. That wasn't one of the options on the table. So for me, it was like, no way. They're worried about my weight, but I had no way to really know my weight, but I was doing pull-ups every day, and I was like, well, I figure if I can maintain the same amount of pull-ups, I'll probably be fine. But then I started thinking, oh man, but what if I'm getting lighter? I could of course still do with the same amount of pull-ups. Anyway, I started to after they said that, I was pretty worried. Come to find out, I was about to, I gained weight to go on the show, and I lost all that weight pretty fast, but I'm actually lighter now than I was when the show ended. So I was a totally normal weight, but I didn't know what they thought. You don't know what they're thinking. And so, yeah, I was worried that they were worried about me, and I'd been up, like I couldn't even sleep. I was up all night thinking about, what am I going to tell them? They cannot be worried. I was showing them like a video, and I still have a bit of a gut. I was like, you guys can't pull me.
I feel like you also said, wait a second, I'm going to be home for Is that what you said? I'm going to be home for Christmas. Yeah, like you were surprised, and like after you'd realize it's over, I'd won.
I was super shocked. I was so surprised. It was such a cool moment. I was like definitely genuine on there. Couldn't believe it. And but yeah, I'd psyched myself out that I was gonna miss Christmas. I was like, oh, it's gonna be disappointing. 2 kids are like 2 and 3 years old, and I didn't have to. I was pretty excited.
Wow.
But it did take a minute to like, for real, did I really win? What?
Yeah. I read on your site, Jordan, that you've said that the development of character and love are the most important aspects of life. Can you share what the development of character and love means to you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So again, you can approach life again, going back to say my dad or something. You can do well in business and life and this and that, but if you don't have a character that is going to allow you to face the suffering and the ultimate suffering of life in a positive way, then it's kind of all for naught. So you kind of view it, life is super enjoyable, and I appreciate it every day, and it's great. But you also know that it's going to end, and if you're not preparing yourself for that and to face that, death around you, and then you kind of just have the blinders on a little bit. So being able to confront that is, a part of the development of character. And I remember going to Russia before. My brother, I remember him telling me, what, there's love between us. So like, even if this helped on a loan too, like even if you're gone for a year, I know I would come back and that love would still be there. So having like secure relationships and having gone to Russia for years at a time and come back and see that those are still intact, I think it helps you see that having good relationships that are founded on, love and developing a solid character are just the most important things. Of course, if I had a chunk of money and my kids hated me and were, spoiled to whatever extent, and it doesn't really do me any good as far as quality of life or them. So I follow like a Christian path, and that's kind of informs what my ideals would be on that front. But there's a lot of angles to look at what character looks like.
How has winning the show, some of the fame, the money, how has that impacted your life?
It's not a lot, although in some ways a lot, in other ways not so much. So basically it allowed us to put money away for retirement, which I didn't have, and then it helped. We lived in just a single bedroom house, and allowed me to like get a different house and renovate it. So now we, the kids have their bedrooms and stuff. So that's like kind of what it did. On the other hand, it's allowed me to transition out from doing construction, which I didn't, I don't really enjoy anymore, to doing things that I do really enjoy, which is spending time in the mountains, teaching these survival courses or this and that. It's been awesome. So I'm super thankful for the doors that have been opened through winning. And it does, like you say, or like I was talking about, it buys me a lot of time with my family. Ultimately, that's kind of what is valuable. So
I do think it would be a cool thing to go out with a leadership team, and maybe I can help facilitate this and be a part of it, but go out with a leadership team to, as Jay Hennessy would say, former Navy SEAL, build some shared adversity by being out in the wilderness with you, learning along the way, but also going through some of the challenges of living like that. Seems much easier.
Oh yeah, team projects.
I feel like that would be a great like just a great team building exercise.
Oh, absolutely. That's been one of the cool things about the weeks we've been doing. They've been 6-day courses so far, and it's just awesome to see how close you get to all these diverse peoples just in a week. Everybody's got a different angle and perspective, but you spend that time together and build, tackle all these projects together, and all of a sudden you're like, man, I could relate to any of these people on a lot deeper level. It's really good for that. That's a cool application for that.
I'd love to do that. One more question, Jordan. I have to believe that the producers of that show alone or other shows want you to come back or do it again or do an all-star version. What's on tap next for you as far as, are you going to be back on TV shows? Are we going to be able to watch you do your thing again?
Potentially. I'd imagine. I wouldn't be surprised to get a call from them sometime, though I haven't yet. And I've been brainstorming other ideas that would be cool for television shows. But I don't know where those are going yet. That's kind of, to some degree, out of my wheelhouse, and it's a little bit out of my control. We'll see what happens. But so I've been really, focusing on doing the things that I like to do, and teaching the courses, and there's actually, a lot of things, and maybe writing a book here in the next little while, and kind of see what happens on the TV side as it comes.
Yeah. Well, Jordan, I really have appreciated your time investment with me, especially where do we find you? Where are you?
Oh, I'm in Idaho, but it's hard to find service around here, so I had to come to some little.
Did you just climb a mountain, or where?
Yeah, I climbed a little mountaintop. This is where we get the best 4Gs.
That's amazing. That is.
I don't
amazing.
even get it at my house. So
really?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you. Where would you send my viewers and listeners to learn more about you?
Come to, I do have a website that's jordanjonas.com, but I post a lot on Instagram. Seems to be the best way to kind of keep connected with people interested in what I'm doing and what I will be doing. I'm going to be setting up next year's course, adventure survival / courses here pretty soon. So if you follow me, I'll keep you guys informed.
Wild, cool. Man. So cool. So cool. I'm going to talk to you more about getting something like that set up. I think that'd be a lot of fun.
It'd be awesome. Let's do it.
Yeah, man. Well, thanks again for being here. And I'd love to continue our dialogue as we both progress, man. I fully plan to.
Let's do it, Ryan. I appreciate it. It's been fun.
All right, man. Awesome. Thanks so much, Jordan.
Thanks, man. Cheers.
All right.